Good afternoon. Welcome to SCA's webinar with Dr. Bill Little on expression of sequence stratigraphy in Outcrop, the Book Cliffs, Utah. Before we start today's webinar, we'd like to ask a few questions about the demographics of our audience. So I will post some polling questions and I'll ask you to respond. So the first question is, what is your primary discipline? Petroleum engineers, geoscientists, facility engineering, petrophysics, or other? And we're starting to get responses now. So it looks like the majority are geoscientists. The vast majority, over 80%, are geoscientists. A few petroleum engineers, and maybe 10 or 11% other. So we'll close that poll and share the results. And then I will pull up the next polling question. How many years of full-time experience do you have in the oil and gas industry? So a bit more diversity in our sample this time. Looks like we have quite a few with less than 1 year, 27%. And let me close and show those results. Over 23% have over 30 years experience. So, but quite a spread in the other groups as well. So let me make sure I'm sharing my slides. And today you are joining another of SCA's webinars in our webinar series, the expression of sequence stratigraphy in Outcrop, the Book Cliffs, Utah. And we welcome Dr. Bill Little. Bill is an instructor for SCA and has over 14 years experience in teaching at the university level in both sedimentary geology and geological mapping, and quite a bit of experience in industry as well. Received his doctorate from CU Boulder, MS and BS degrees from BYU, and he's also been associated with Missouri Rolla, MST now, and a number of other colleges. And currently he's teaching at BYU, Idaho. And so we welcome Dr. Little today. Bill teaches a field trip for SCA. It's scheduled in May in 2019. And similar title, the Book Cliffs, Utah, a case study in coastal sequence stratigraphy. And this is a field trip where you start out in Salt Lake and then you get to see the Book Cliffs in Utah. So hopefully those of you who attend today's webinar might be interested in signing up for that. Registration is now open, and you did get a discount if you register before year end for this class that's offered next year in May. We can also schedule it as an in-house class if you'd like to schedule it for your company. And SCA, in addition to training, we also offer consulting, direct hire projects and studies, and all sorts of consulting work. So I'd like to remind our attendees today that you are being muted during the call, so you will have a chance to post your questions in the question field on the dashboard, and then we will cover those at the end of the presentation, and you will be anonymous. So feel free to ask whatever question you wish, and I will read them or I will summarize them. And so without further ado, I'm going to give Bill the presentation rights. And Bill, it's all yours.
Okay, that
looks good.
All right. Well, thank you, Susan, and welcome everyone. The purpose of this webinar is to provide an overview or a summary of the field course that Susan mentioned that we teach in the spring on sequence stratigraphy in the Book Cliffs of Utah. Because of a limited amount of time, I'm not going to go into a detailed explanation of concepts and principles, but rather what I want to do is to show the actual expressions of these features as they appear in Outcrop. So in a way, it'll be a picture show, lots of photographs. Okay, so first of all, why would it be significant to take a course like this one? In part, it's simply that the Book Cliffs have become one of, if not the premier locality on the Earth's surface in which sequence stratigraphy is understood, is taught, and is expressed. In addition to that, petroleum and coal companies are more and more using the Book Cliffs area as an analog for their fields. One of the comments that I often receive from participants is that the real benefit of taking a course like this one is that it gives you a chance to, in essence, stand inside of your field or inside of your reservoir, to see the facies and the facies associations, the way that they change laterally and vertically, to see some of the inhomogeneities that are present within a rock body that may not appear in some of the geophysical study methods, and to see the scale of the different rock bodies as they appear in their fields. The photograph that I have here, notice that the well logs on there. The last time I taught this course this past summer, one of the participants, Brian Stevens, took a log from a local well, superimposed it on a couple of the photos that I had in the guidebook to illustrate how these outcrops can be projected into the subsurface in terms of visualization. Down at the bottom, I show a core and a log that's associated with that core. The last day of the course we spend at the Utah Core Research Center, where we'll actually log a core that's from the same general area. In terms of comparing the outcrop and subsurface, here's an interesting study that was done by Hampson and others, in which these are the same stratigraphic units in both figures, but one is based on outcrop studies, and the other interpretation, the other cross section, comes from an interpretation of well logs. You can see that the patterns, the general pattern, is similar between the two, but there are also some differences. So again, understanding these units in outcrop might help us to better interpret the subsurface material. The course content, if you were to take the course in the summer, there we will review the concepts and principles of sequence stratigraphy in some detail, the stacking patterns, surfaces, and so on. One of the significant aspects, and something that I'm going to do with this presentation, is we're going to hike through a set of stacked pair sequences. The purpose of this is to notice the repetitious nature of the pair sequences, and how some of the changes can be used to identify the important surfaces, such as sequence boundaries, transgressive surfaces, maximum flooding surfaces. On the trip, we measure a number of sections to look at the lateral variability in some of these stratigraphic units. I'll show some of that here as well, so that we can see how these units change from onshore to offshore. There's actually an opportunity to see the landward and the basinward pinch outs of some of the major sandstone bodies. Toward the end of the course, photomosaics are provided, in which facies maps can be constructed of entire smaller order sequences that are present within single outcrops. And throughout the entire course, we will emphasize the concept of multiple working hypotheses. That is, by the time we're done, hopefully we can look at these strata and that they could have been developed in a variety of ways. It's not simply used to see, or tectonics, compaction, climate, other things will also play a role. And one last thing before I get to the photographs, just so that there's an understanding of how I use the terminology. There are several schemes that are used to label sequence stratigraphy. The concepts remain the same throughout all of these. My preference is to use the model that has 4 systems tracks, where the falling stage systems tract is separated from the high stand, so that there is part of the system that emphasizes the forced or regressive nature of a part of the sequence. So I will be discussing things in terms of a falling stage, low stand, transgressive, and high stand systems tract. But the transgressive systems tract is separated by the transgressive and maximum flooding surfaces. Oh, and a general idea of the geological setting. The strata of the book cliffs were deposited during the late Cretaceous, the Campanian, in a foreland basin. I used the model of Descelles and Giles to subdivide the foreland basin into 4 components. This particular trip, we spend just a little bit of time looking at a couple of outcrops of the synorogenic conglomerates over the wedge top, but most of the course will take place in the 4D, where we'll start at the bottom of the section and work upward and basinward toward the end of the week. The middle diagram here from Armstrong, which has been redrawn by many people, but I've chosen to use the original here, shows that the nature of deposits within this foreland basin are such that we see progradation, backstepping, progradation, backstepping. That same pattern is exhibited over and over again in the production of a number of third-order sequences. The one that we're going to look at is this one right here. If you can see the pointer, the Black Hawk Formation in Castlegate Sandstone. Actually, at the base of the Black Hawk is another unit called the Star Point Sandstone. So this is the Star Point Black Hawk Castlegate sequence. So over here is simply a map of the state of Utah, showing where the book cliffs are located. Down here, the state of Utah is located along the margin between the Western Interior Seaway and the severe orogenic belt. The course, the first stops of the course are in Lake Fork Canyon to look at the synorogenic conglomerates, and then we finish looking at some of the eustatic effects at Thompson Canyon. And today we're going to focus, though, almost entirely on the middle part here, pretty much within this rectangle, the area near Helper, Utah. Okay, to the photographs. This photograph is of the cliff face on the north side of the town of Helper, which you can see at the bottom of the hill. And here you can see the basal part of this third order sequence. At the bottom of the hill is the Mancos Shale, a marine deposit, a very thick mudstone that grades up into the first prominent sandstone, which is the Panther tongue of the Star Point sandstone. In this case, the sequence boundary is actually a correlative conformity. So as you'll recall, the definition of a sequence boundary is an unconformity and its correlative conformities. In this area, we're looking at a forced regressive deposit that was deposited as part of a river-dominated delta. And this is the last lobe, the last part of that progradation before accommodation began to accumulate again. And that's where we get the Panther. Above the Panther, in the stores member, we have interbedded Mancos Shale stores. There actually should be a third pair sequence up here. It's hard to see in this photograph. But we're looking at a pattern where we have more shoreline deposits, in this case, more traditional shore face type of a succession. And notice that this sandstone is better developed than the one above. What this is suggesting is that in this area, as we're moving upward through the stores, the shorelines are not reaching quite as far into the basin, and so we're looking at a retrogradational parasequence stacking pattern, and that would make the transgressive systems tract, so the transgressive surface at the base, and the parasequence that is not well shown in this photo just above has a very similar development to this to the one that I'm showing with an arrow, and that's where I put the maximum flooding surface. I think we've changed into the aggradational pattern as accommodation production is slowed. Then you can see the thick stack of sandstone above that that contains several parasequences in the Spring Canyon and Aberdeen members of the Black Hawk Formation. The general pattern is shown in the figure in the lower left-hand corner. Which shows the overall progradational pattern. So we've got the Panther and the following stage low stand systems tract, the backstepping pattern in the stores, transgressive, and then into the high stand systems tract. The figure on the right, which I'm actually going to show a number of times through this discussion, is a little bit more detailed. And what this shows is that in addition to the third order sequence, there are a number of fourth order sequences that are present. So sequences within sequences. Today, I'm not going to discuss these, but you can see that there are a number of incised valley fills, and during the field course, we would visit a number of those. So today, we're going to talk about pretty much a vertical section right through here, the Panther at the base, up through the Stores, the Spring Canyon, into the Aberdeen, and then what we refer to as Black Hawk undifferentiated, which are the coastal plain deposits, and the terminology of these members has not yet been applied. This is just another illustration of the same interval. The reason I put this one here is the prior picture. Notice that the Panther tongue is quite muddy. We're looking at the distal end. If we move just a little bit to the left of the photograph, out of the photograph, so the Panther is actually in this area a very well-developed sandstone. Interbedded mudstones at the base, and then sandstone. The rest of the succession is the same as what we just discussed. Here it is one more time. The reason that I want to show it once more is that this is the area that we're going to make a hike through the section. So if you look at this diagram, I'm standing in Gentile Wash. We're going to hike up Gentile Wash. We're looking across. We're going to follow the section from the base of the Panther, essentially the sequence boundary, on up through the Stores and the Spring Canyon, and the hike is going to end at the top of the Aberdeen. I'm sorry, the top of the Spring Canyon member, close to the contact with the Aberdeen. Okay, so let's look at photographs of each of these elements as they appear. As I mentioned, the contact here between the Panther tongue and the underlying Mancos shale is a correlative conformity. That is, there is not an unconformity at the sequence boundary in this location. Down below is the Mancos, which is a marine mudstone, and notice that it's gradually, initially coarsening upward, becoming more and more silty. And I placed a sequence boundary about where we start to pick up some of the thin sandstones. The interbedded sandstones become thicker, the mudstones become thinner vertically through the section till we get up here to this thicker sandstone body, and we've lost the mudstones, but the sedimentary structures are very similar, and I'll show those to you here in a moment. So with each of these figures, I'm trying to show where of these arrows where it would occur on this diagram, sequence stratigraphic model, and again where it would occur on the cross section by Hampson. Okay, above the sequence boundary is the Panther tongue. As I mentioned, it's the falling stage to low stand systems tract. Here you can see it a little bit better. Down at the base, the interbedded nature of the sandstones and mudstones, grading up into the thicker sandstone intervals. We lose the mudstone upward. Now this diagram down at the bottom in the subsurface, a little bit more proximally than what we see here. According to some of the literature, the Panther does show a downward stepping, offlapping pattern, and what we're looking at Gentile Wash is simply the last of these deltas in this downstepping pattern. From a distance, looking at this, and one of the things I like to do in the outcrop is to stand off of the distance and ask the participants to identify the depositional system. And in most cases, as we're standing in the distance, the interpretation here is that we're looking at a typical shore face deposit, what you'd find in a wave-dominated delta. But when you walk up more closely and look at the details, rather than the hummocky bedding that you would see in a standard shore face succession, what we're seeing here is that these are dominated by boma sequences. So each one of these sandstone beds consists of a structureless sandstone at the base, parallel laminated sandstone toward the top, capped by a ripple-bedded sandstone, very fine sand, almost a silt in that case. In some cases, it will actually demonstrate some climbing ripples. Toward the bottom of the succession, we see a little bit more of the top of the boma, and as we get toward the top of this interbedded succession, we're seeing more preservation of the basal part of the boma, suggesting a progradational pattern. Above this lower yellow line, the more continuous bed is where we've pretty much lost the mudstone, and we're now looking at stacked boma successions. Again, mostly the lower portion of it, once again indicating that we are looking at a progradational interval. The bottoms of these beds often have fluke casts and tool marks. We can have load casts as well. These indicate high energy, those waning energy. The interpretation is that these are delta front turbidites. And that's one of the things that we use here to distinguish between a river and a wave-dominated delta. The river-dominated delta is much more likely to have the delta front turbidite types of successions. Then above this next yellow line, there is another significant change in the character of the deposits. I have those up here at the top. These are primarily structureless sandstone to parallel laminated with some trough cross bedding in between. So it appears that these sand bodies were deposited very rapidly and then possibly reworked by waves or by breaking waves on the surface. If you stand back and you look at the beds in the upper unit, they tend to be more lenticular in shape. They're a lot less continuous than they appear in this photograph, and many of them are separated by thin intervals of mudstone. The mud is a little bit different than what we see underneath in the Mancos Shale. There are a lot of plant fragments, a lot of carbonaceous material. It appears to have more of a terrestrial type of an origin. So the interpretation for the upper part is that these are channel mouth bars and are separated by mudstones associated with interdeltaic bays. I'll talk about the transgressive lag here in a moment. But one other indication that these are deltaic deposits, if you look at the figure down at the bottom of the screen, there's the sequence boundary, the transgressive surface. You can take any one of these beds, and if you follow it from the right to the left, notice that it rises, and eventually each one of these beds comes into contact with what is the actual depositional surface of the delta. So there you can see the declinoforms that are associated with the delta front. Okay, still looking at the panther tongue, I'm going to stray away from Gentile Wash for a little bit. We're moving over into Spring Canyon at the mouth of a place called Sowbelly Gulch. In this area, off to the right of the screen, right of this top photo, I've got an enlargement down below. The panther tongue looks a lot like it did at Gentile Wash at the delta front. The main difference here, as we're moving more proximally, is that the interval of channel mouth bars is much thicker, and the portion that consists of the delta front turbidites is much thinner. And then just to the left of this photo and across the road, okay, right here, if you can see the middle photo where I have the arrow, that's the same outcrop as in the lower right. So I've moved a short distance laterally, and notice that the sandstone is quite lens-shaped. So there's a thick lens-shaped sandstone. It's about 90 feet thick right here at the mouth of the canyon. It's a fairly clean sand for the most part, with a number of shaly partings that are contained within. But the geometry of this thing is a large lens-shaped deposit that's filled with a number of smaller lens-shaped deposits. So in essence, we have channel forms within channel forms. At the base of the channel forms, often there are clay class molds. They are typically filled by, oops, I've got a mouse here with a hair trigger. They're typically filled with either horizontal laminations, structureless sandstone, trough cross bedding. There are a number of thin intervals that have muddy inner beds. There can be double clay drapes, suggesting some tidal influence along with the flager bedding, and some Tritolites burrows. So again, so what we've done is we've moved just a little bit further proximal in the system, and we've gone from the delta front to the distributary channels. I want to look at the channels a little bit more closely, and this figure at the bottom from Olaru and Bhattacharya, I've never been able to pronounce that one. They have created a facies map of this channel sandstone, and in here you can see where they've labeled a number of the channels. One of the interesting things about this outcrop is that the channels have a wide range of orientations. The upper left photo is one that I took. These are channels that are oriented east-west, and the right photo is from 6 to 8 in the photo below as well. and those channels are oriented north-south. So you've got a large distributary channel with smaller distributary channels. These are referred to by Olerud and Bhattacharya as terminal distributary channels. The model that they use is this one. I think it's a very good model. The Wax Lake and Atchafalaya deltas in the Gulf Coast. And you notice the similarity here. It's a lobe-shaped deposit. We tend to have this image in our minds of the Mississippi Delta when we talk about river-dominated deltas. And I agree with this study that that really is quite anomalous, even in the modern. In the Cretaceous, I think this is a much better model for our deltas, a lobe shape with distributary channels that are bifurcating over and over again, becoming increasingly shallow as they approach the sea, and they have a wide range of orientations. So in the Wax Lake Delta, if you look at this channel, it's oriented almost east-west, whereas this one is pretty much north-south in its orientation. That fits in well with what we see in the Panther. Something that's still a little bit, in my mind anyway, up for discussion is the nature within this delta of these clinoforms. The study by Olerud and Bhattacharya suggests that these are landward accreting macroforms, and I'm still leaning a little bit more toward the lateral accretion aspect. Where the interpretation comes from is here is a map from Van Heerden in 1983, where he mapped the growth of channel mouth bars within the Atchafalaya River. And what he noted was that these bars grow downstream or basinward. They grow laterally, but they also grow upstream as they're developed. Whereas the paleo flow direction for the Panther tongue is from north to south, and north to south would be left to right in the lower photograph. The thought is that these are probably landward accreting bed forms. The issue that I have with it is that this 90-meter thick or 90 foot thick, about 30-meter thick sand body disappears completely in the direction of flow within probably a couple hundred meters. And that's an awfully quick disappearance of the sand unit. So we need to go back in there and study some of the paleo currents. But it's a very interesting idea. But so that there's still some things that we're looking at in that area. Okay, so sticking to the Panther tongue, we looked at the delta front, and then we moved over and we looked at the Panther tongue, where it consists of distributary channels. In each of those places, we will measure sections and compare them. If we move a little bit further basinward, the Panther tongue becomes primarily a mudstone. So now we're looking at the delta front to the pro-delta environment of the same stratigraphic unit. And to try to put all these together, it was a little bit hard to do. The photos here of the distributary channels and the delta front that we looked at before are actually just a little bit behind us, or behind this photo, and out of the photo to the left. The picture of the fine-grained deposits is on the right-hand side of this. You can see it in this pyramid-shaped hill. The distance from the distributary channels to the fine-grained deposits I'm showing here, in terms of map distance, is about 10 kilometers. But in terms of depositional dip, we're only looking at about 1.5 kilometers. So this is a strongly oblique transect. It's more along depositional strike and depositional dip, but from back here out of the photo up to this point, you can see down below that there is a significant change in facies. So here's one of the places where you get a chance to look at the scale of the unit, but also notice the change in heterogeneity. Here the sand is much cleaner, although there still are barriers that are present within the sand body. And as we move from the distributary channels to the delta front to the fine grain, we're picking up more and more mudstone and more partitioning within the sand body. And to try to relate this again to the Atchafalaya River, here's the same map that I showed before from Van Heerden, and If I were to superimpose on this the outcrops from the panther tongue, I would probably put the distributary channels up about here, where we have a wide channel that has other channels that are that would be cutting through it. Maybe the delta front channel mouth bars, toward the end of the outcrop, and then a short distance, from that the delta front. And here the scale is very similar to what we see in the panther as well. So okay, on top of the panther is a very sharp surface that is overlain by the Mancos Shale. The panther tongue, this is Mancos Shale. The stores member is up above that. So marine shale directly on top of a deltaic sandstone. This is indicative of a significant transgression of the shoreline. And to look at the transgressive surface in detail, what are some other evidences that that transgression actually did occur? So we've got the mudstone on top. You can see the hammer up here for scale. Here's what the surface looks like. The surface is quite undulatory, suggesting development of a ravinement surface as the fair weather wave base passed up and over these deposits, and then once it was abandoned, a significant amount of bioturbation before it was covered by the marine shale. So here again, we can see it in a lot more detail. Okay, here you can see the erosional ravinement surface quite clearly on top of the panther. And these features are present whether we're at the delta front or the distributary channels. Here, the ravinement, along with some bioturbation, a lot more burrowing, bioturbation, asymmetric ripples. Occasionally, there are broken up shell fragments that we find on the surface, as well as carbonized wood fragments and the impressions of wood fragments. So again, indications that the surface was abandoned for some period of time, had some terrestrial influence associated with it, and then was flooded and covered by a marine mudstone. Okay, above the transgressive surface would be the transgressive systems tract. So here's the Mancos Shale. The first parasequence within the stores member, a little bit more Mancos Shale. The next parasequence within the stores member, there's a little bit more Mancos Shale here, and another parasequence within the stores. And so on this one, you can clearly see that each subsequent parasequence, at least for from the panther through the first two of the stores, each one has a less well-defined development than the one before. So the idea here is that we're looking at a backstepping, a retrogradational parasequence stacking pattern. A complete deltaic succession overlain by the very distal portion of a transition zone into a lower shore face, simply the transition zone and a couple of parasequences in this location. And to look at them more closely, we're back now in Gentile Wash. We're making the hike up Gentile Wash, and as we hike through, we actually come into close contact. You can put your fingers on and take photographs of and describe these parasequences in detail. So this is the first parasequence within the stores member. Okay, so remember below us is the panther tongue, which is a delta, then a marine mudstone. And here we have the Mancos is actually at the base of the photo. We're coming through the transition zone where we have alternating mudstones and sandstones. The sandstones consist of hummocky bedding in this case, more typical of a wave-dominated delta or prograding shore face. They become amalgamated toward the top. So we go from the transition zone into the lower shore face. Moving up the canyon, this is the second parasequence within the stores member. Once again, we've got Mancos at the bottom, interbedded Mancos and hummocky bedded sandstone in the stores, but we lack the lower shore face. We really don't get out of the transition zone here. We become more proximal upward, but we don't get out of the lower shore face. So this shoreline did not prograde as far into the basin as the underlying shoreline, again suggesting that we are undergoing a retrogradational pattern. And to show it in a little bit larger scale, parasequence 1, parasequence 2, and this is the third parasequence within the stores. These two in this diagram, you can finally see them fairly well, that they have very similar development associated with them. So where we've got backstepping, now where the development of these two pair of sequences is very much the same, we've gone from a retrogradational pattern into an aggradational pattern, and this is where we would place the maximum flooding surface. And again, as we hike up through there, you get to see each one of these close up and try to determine where you want to put that surface. Now, another diagram, another angle showing the same pair sequence 1, 2, and 3 within the stores. And then notice that above this surface, after deposition of the third pair sequence in the stores, we move into the spring canyon, and then we clearly have progressively better preservation of the pair sequences. This one moves from the Manco Shale through the transition zone into lower shore face. The next sequence is actually fully developed. You can see the white cap on there. That suggests that we go all the way through the upper shore face and foreshore, and probably have some coal, or at least some organic material that's preserved on top, producing acid, which would then move downward through this sand body, leaching the feldspars and leaving the white cap. And we can see that again above in the next pair sequence. Then we have a little bit of a transgression once again at the base of the Aberdeen, and then another shoreline pair sequence in the Aberdeen member of the Black Hawk Formation. Okay, this suggests that we have moved then into the high stand systems tract. We're now looking at a pattern in which the pair sequences are becoming more sandy, a little bit thicker, and each one is prograding further into the basin than the one before it. Here's a close-up of the Spring Canyon Formation, where again you can see that relationship. Okay, so then hiking through these pair sequences. Okay, we're now into the high stand systems tract, and notice that this pair sequence is very similar to the one that we saw before in the stores. This is why I put the maximum flooding surface below this unit and above the other. We're probably looking at an aggradational pattern in which the pair sequences have very similar development to one another. Moving upward through the Spring Canyon, this is the next pair sequence, and now we move from the transition zone back into the lower shore face. So this next pair sequence has a greater development than the one underneath. The shoreline has prograded a little bit further into the basin. Moving upward, this is that next pair sequence, the one that was fully developed. Transition zone, lower shore face, into the upper where I have the arrow would be the upper shore face and the foreshore. There's the pair sequence flooding surface. And then the next pair sequence is quite thick, going from marine shale through transition zone, the various parts of the shore face, lower, upper, and foreshore. Then we have another pair sequence boundary right through here, and there's some coal on top of this one. To look at it a little bit more closely, this is that same thick pair sequence, the lower part of it, where you can see the interbedded sandstone and hummocky sandstone and mudstone. The upper part of it, and this figure is clearly shown the trough crossbedding of the upper shore face and the parallel laminations present in the foreshore deposit. So the Spring Canyon and the stores actually are more indicative of a wave-dominated delta and a prograding shore face succession that we commonly see. This is a very typical vertical profile that's made of these deposits. This one is modified a little bit after Van Wagner. So down at the bottom, the marine mudstones separated by the hummocky bedded sandstones, which become amalgamated toward the top. Trough crossbedding, parallel laminations, and coal, which you can see in the upper left photo over here at the top of the succession. So in this case, we have a fully developed shoreline, and this is what we see through pretty much the rest of the Black Hawk Formation as we move upward and basinward through the section. this kind of a sequence. We do take some time to look at the landward pinch out of the pair sequences. So looking at this figure here, if I go back a couple of slides, or a few slides, okay, these two pair sequences, the one at the top is really thick, and this one, the first two well-developed pair sequences in the Spring Canyon, are the same two that you see on the right side of this lower photo. Okay, the upper photo shows the big picture. You see the panther at the base through the stores, that same succession, and we're looking up in the rectangular box. Then down at the bottom, you can see those well-developed pair sequences. But the upper one, notice what happens to it as you follow it to the left. Over here, it pinches out, and it's replaced on the left by interbedded, sorry about that, by interbedded mudstones and sandstones. And over here, the sandstones are dipping in a landward direction, whereas in the thicker sand, bedding is oriented, dipping toward the basin. The thought here is that we are looking at a barrier island that then developed into a progradational beach following this rise in base level. On the landward side are some washover fan deposits interbedded with lagoonal muds. And as we move just a little bit further inland from that, this is that same lagoonal succession back at Sowbelly Gulch over by Spring Canyon now. So here's the thick sandstone is out of the picture. This is that lower well-developed sandstone. This is the lagoonal deposit and a little bit of an enlargement. So here you can see the coal of the underlying parasequence, lagoonal mud on top of that. So that would be the parasequence boundary. And then the sandstones in this case, notice that it coarses upward. These have been interpreted as a bayhead delta. The model down at the bottom, prograding sand, base level rises, barrier forms, lagoon behind it. Once the lagoon is filled, the barrier island is going to prograde and form the next sandstone parasequence. But there are a number of indicators in here to show that we do have a significant amount of tidal influence along with the or behind the wave-dominated shoreline deposits. And just to round it off in this area, once we finish looking at the Spring Canyon, then we go back over to the highway and look at the overlying deposits. The Spring Canyon member is overlain by the Aberdeen member. The Aberdeen member is very similar in characteristic to the Spring Canyon. And there's a flooding surface on top of that, and overlying it now are coastal plain deposits that are equivalent to the remaining members of the Black Hawk Formation. The Kenilworth, Sunnyside, Grassy, and the desert are all represented here by coastal plain. It's referred to as Black Hawk undifferentiated because there's not yet been an attempt to separate these into members to try to correlate it with the shoreline deposits. Now, as we move basinward during the week of the field course, this interval starts to appear very similar to what we see here in the lower units in the Spring. These take on the appearance of the Spring Canyon and the Aberdeen. The Aberdeen and the Spring Canyon merge into the Manco Shale and become shale deposits. Ultimately, the entire succession becomes a marine shale to the east. The succession is overlain by the Castlegate sandstone at the top of the picture here, and in the lower right, a very thick braided stream deposit. Most workers in the area ascribe a sequence boundary at the base of the Castlegate. That's another one of those things that I'm a little bit more dubious about. Some of that has to do with its position within the proximal part of the foreland basin and whether or not eustatic impacts would be felt this far upstream. Further basinward, I think that a sequence boundary at the base of the Castlegate works very well, but here I'm not certain. That should be a KC, not a KS. And a close-up picture of the material here. Okay, so with that, that's basically it for the slides that I had prepared for this presentation. Again, mostly we're looking at just the proximal part of this, and if we took the field course, we would look at the changes as they occur in the basinward direction. So I guess with that, we can take any questions.
Thanks, Bill. We do have a few minutes now for questions, so if our listeners want to type their questions in the question box, we're starting to receive some of those now. I'll remind everyone that later today you'll receive a link to a recording of today's webinar. We'll ask you to fill out an evaluation form, and we'll also provide you with registration details for Dr. Little's field trip. This is the one to the Book Cliffs, Utah, a case study in coastal sequence stratigraphy. It's offered by SCA next year in May 6th through 10th. 2019, so you want to start making your travel plans now. Last summer, Dr. Little's course sold out, so you don't want to wait too late and miss the opportunity. Okay, here's the first question. Do all the distributary channels show a basal lag? There are smaller ones and larger ones.
No. Let me go back to that that picture if I can. It's way back at the beginning. They don't, and I think that now the larger channels are more likely to have the basal lag than the smaller channels. I think that part of the reason for that is that we're looking at channel abandonment and then reoccupation in some cases, and really what you're seeing filling these channels in most cases is further channel mouth bars. A lot of times, such as this one, there is a nice mud drape down at the base where the channel was abandoned. It appears as though mud settled over the surface, and then later the channel was reoccupied and sand was deposited within.
Okay. The next question is about the scale. Can you tell us more about the width of these channels and the height of some of these features that we're seeing in your photographs?
So yeah, the entire succession here, this is probably around 30 meters, 100 feet, maybe 90 feet for the entire succession. The smaller channels that are contained within. Most of these are just a meter to maybe 2 or 3 meters thick. In terms of width, we're probably looking at up to tens of meters for the smaller channels. The larger scale ones can be several hundred meters across.
Very good. So the next question is related to the occurrence of landward accretionary elements. Are they common, and when they occur, how often do they occur?
Okay, this is really my first exposure to them, and my understanding of them comes pretty much from this paper from Olaru and Bhattacharya. This is maybe part of my skepticism of applying that still down here at the bottom. But according to their studies, and they've looked at a couple of other deltas in the Soviet Union and elsewhere, they seem to think that it's a fairly common process. And what this is on the upward, the landward accreting part, is a filling of the previous distributary channel by portions of the channel mouth bar. And in this paper, they do have some pretty good photographs of the landward accretion. So I think it does occur. I'm just not convinced that that's what's taking place here. But it does appear to be a fairly common feature in river-dominated deltas. But I'll have to defer to them for any more on that one for now.
Related to those analogs, you've provided the modern analogs, the Wax Lake and Atchafalaya deltas. What are some analog oil and gas producing formations or oil and gas basins that you might consider analogs to the Book Cliffs?
Well, when the group was here from Nigeria last year, they thought that maybe the Niger Delta was a good example for some of that in the some of the stuff that they're working on out there. Obviously, many of the Cretaceous basins through the western and interior, from New Mexico and Arizona on up through Wyoming and Montana. Some of the others, I'm not as familiar as I probably should be, but I'll make sure to pick that up.
Certainly, there's.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, certainly there's international interest in your field trip. We had quite a multicultural group from all over the world registered to attend today, so I think there's quite a bit of interest.
So there is, and that's I'm actually working on gathering additional analogs. That's an active part of what I'm working on.
Very good. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the elements of the field trip that you try to point out during the week?
Oh, sure. The first day of the trip is basically a broad overview. The second, where we go through the sequence stratigraphy in general and how and familiarize people with the stratigraphic units. The second day is spent almost entirely in the Panther tongue. That's where we look at it in detail, measure sections at the localities that I showed in here, and compare those to one another. On the third day, we make the hike through the entire succession from the bottom of the Panther to the top of the Spring Canyon, and then we try to visit some of the other localities within the Spring Canyon member where we can look at the landward pinch out. That we have to do with binoculars, but we can visit and walk up to the outcrop that has the back barrier deposits associated with it. From there, we begin to move eastward. We visit a couple of other locations where we can look at the same interval, but where it appears a little bit differently, in part because there has been some incision by these lower or these higher order, smaller scale sequences. So we can see some of the incised valley fills, some very strongly tidally influenced deposits that are associated with those. And we look at those in a couple of localities, look at a wave-dominated delta quite closely at Woodside Canyon. The next day, we're looking more at things in terms of a regional scale. So we find a couple of spots where we have very long photomosaics stand off in a distance, and the participants can map out the basinward pinch out and see how these sand bodies become separated into the thicker ones into thinner sand bodies separated by mudstones. And then we in Tusher Canyon and Thompson Canyon, we provide other photomosaics where there are complete fourth order sequences exposed in a single outcrop. They take time to describe those outcrops, measure the sections there, take the photomosaic, draw the boundaries on it, and we have a detailed discussion of those features. And the last thing that we do, there are these isolated sand bodies that are present within the Manco Shale that are thought to correlate to one of the members of the Black Hawk that some have referred to as detached low stand deposits. They're not very thick. They're not very wide, and they're scattered throughout the basin. We visit one of those so they can basically see all the different aspects of the sequence before we're done.
So the Manco Shale is one of the emerging areas for unconventional reservoirs. Any comments on how that might translate to those types of deposits?
I haven't spent much time in the Mancos yet. I've just gotten access to a handheld gamma ray machine. One of the things that I want to do this summer is to take some of these, or go to some of these outcrops of the Manco Shale that we know correlate to the more sandy parts of the section, and make some gamma ray logs through these and see if we can identify some of the cycles. When you look at the Manco Shale, there are clearly cyclical events contained within. how they correspond specifically with the sandstone units. I don't know at this point, but there is sequence stratigraphy that can be done in the Mancos, and that's a developing part of the project.
The next question is there any evidence of tectonic events on the outcrops, and how can you relate to those with the structures we see in the outcrops?
Okay, part of the challenge that we have here is distinguishing eustatic events from tectonic events. And, I'm not sure that we can, looking at a particular outcrop, say that a specific surface was developed because of basin subsidence rather than base level rise. But my thoughts are that in the very proximal part of the basin, most of what we're seeing is tectonically controlled. And that's part of why we stopped to look at the syntectonic conglomerates in the Lake Fork Canyon area. As we move more basinward, by the time we get to Thompson Canyon, I do think that we're looking at a significant amount of eustacy. And the reason that I differentiate between the two is in the proximal part of the basin, where the deposits are the coarsest and where you would expect to see deeper incision if the result was from a drop in base level. We really don't see that. We see stacked, very coarse deposits that really have no incision into the material underneath. And so I think that in the proximal part of the basin, we're looking at primarily space that's created by tectonic activity. For the distal part of the basin, we still see that, but we're beginning to see some of the eustatic control, and that's where we're seeing the incised valley fills as base level drops, and there's incision into the underlying shoreline deposits that are backfilled by tidal and then fluvial systems. And this is part of my questioning of the sequence boundary at the base of the Castle Gate in the proximal part of the basin.
Related to the wave-dominated parts of the sequence, are longshore bars and barrier islands well preserved in the record of the book clips?
The barrier islands are preserved, but they're the most proximal. They're at the landward pinch out of the thick sandstone parasequences. And the main reason that the main way that we can identify the barrier islands is by the lagoonal deposits that are present behind them, such as I showed at the very end of the discussion. So let me go back to that figure down here at the bottom. So in this case, or let me go to this one first. So down at the bottom, these sandstones show very strong basinward progradation, but they also terminate abruptly on the landward end. So this is what I've been referring to as the landward pinch out. So base level rises, the surface is flooded, and then progradation occurs again. Once this back barrier area is filled with sediment, then the barrier island will transform into a progradational beach succession, a typical short face type of a succession, and build landward. And so the way that we identify it, going back to this picture, so this is if you were to measure a section right here where you see KBA up at the top, this would look like two stacked beaches. You come just a few tens of meters over, you measure a section through the exact same interval, and over here it's going to look like a lagoonal succession on top of one of the beaches. It's a very abrupt landward pinch out, and this is what I would think of as the barrier island, and then this is the lagoonal succession. So the barrier islands are just very small scale features that are located at the landward terminus of the major sand bodies.
You showed an example.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, as far as the longshore bars, there are examples. The deltaic deposit that we look at in Woodside Canyon, near the top, there are some lagoonal type sediments, and I think that those are deposits that accumulated behind a longshore bar.
You showed an example where a prograding cliniform died out about 100 meters and suggested it was too short a distance for lateral accretion. What is a good scale to be used for such features to be interpreted as bar growth along a channel.
Yeah, and let me bouncing back and forth here. Let's see.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually a little bit. Yeah, that's this one here at the bottom. Yeah, my my thoughts here is that I think that these are lateral accretion. At least that's where I'm leaning right now. But I'm still seriously looking at what was done by these other workers. And the reason that I like lateral accretion rather than, there are a couple reasons that I like lateral accretion rather than the landward accreting on this. One of them, if I go up just a little bit further, okay, the major channel that you see in the middle up here, again, this is about 30 meters thick. Where I'm standing in the direction of flow about probably about 200 meters away. So that thick sandstone would have to completely die out by the time that it reached the point where I'm standing, and I'm having trouble visualizing the that the front of the delta without thinning is going to end that quickly, and so the thought behind that suggests that these are the landward accreting macroforms is that the paleo flow, the general paleo flow of the delta is toward the person looking at the photograph. Now, the other thing, this valley that runs along this cliff face, I think it is along the margin of the sandstone. That's the reason that the valley is there, that it's eroding down into the muddier deposits. But I think that this is a lateral that was formed by lateral accretion, and that the paleo current in this outcrop is from left to right, not from in the screen to out of the screen. Did that make sense?
Yes, thank you. So, Bill, thank you today for the webinar. We're nearing the end of our time commitment, and we've had some great questions. I want to remind all the attendees that later today you'll receive a link to a recording of today's webinar, an evaluation form, and registration details for Dr. Little's field trip to the Book Cliffs, Utah, a case study in coastal sequence stratigraphy that's offered by SCA May 6th through 10th in 2019. Thanks very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks.